Okay, so we've talked about what was going on in 1942 in the Pacific Theater of Operations against Japan. What's going on in the Atlantic as we come to grips with going to war with Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany? Not as busy as what's going on in the Pacific, but there's a couple things going on, so we'll talk about them for a few minutes here. I think I can keep this one short. I always say that, though, don't I? So what's going on in the Atlantic? Well, if we want to put troops into Europe, we've got to get them somewhere. So England is our base of operations, which is one reason why we had worked so hard to keep England in the war. It would have been very hard to prosecute a war against the Germans from the United States. So England gives us a base to operate from. So we're going to start working on shipping troops over. But the problem we have is we have to gain control of the shipping lanes across the Atlantic. Once Hitler and the Germans declare war on us and we respond in kind, now the German submarine force can actually come all the way over to the United States. The submarines are much more advanced than the ones in World War I, and they can actually threaten the coastline of the United States. And of course, everything between the United States and England is subject to attack. Okay? So we have to come to grips with this submarine menace. Okay? And it takes a while to get this thing going. We've got just a few pictures kind of give you an idea of what's going on. Okay, so this is often called the Battle of the Atlantic. Okay, but it's not a battle like, say, the Battle of Midway or Battle of Iwo Jima, where there's like a start date and there's some fighting and then it ends. This battle goes all through the war. Okay. At the end of World War II, because it will eventually end, there are still German submarines out in the ocean threatening our ships. Now, the threat will be much less at that time, but the submarine threat never goes away. It's there all through the war. But the critical year, of course, the British were having trouble in 41, but now in 42 with the Americans in the war, basically anything sailing out in the Atlantic is probably fair game for a German submarine. So we're having to deal with this. Okay. So let's go to the next slide here. So just a picture of a ship sinking. This could be a tanker, judging from the amount of smoke coming out of the tankers. Burn really spectacularly because they're filled with oil. Okay. The German submarines, now no longer being restricted out into the middle of the Atlantic. Actually, some of them will come operate right off of U.S. shore. They can interdict coastal travels, coastal shipping. Okay? It takes us a while to get a handle on this. Okay? I mean, so you could be a German submarine set outside of a major harbor like New York or Norfolk, Virginia, wherever, just anywhere we're shipping, Charleston, South Carolina, anywhere where shipping is coming in and out. There's going to be ships, and so submarines can just patrol up the coast of the United States, attacking shipping. And it takes us a while to figure out things like, oh, hey, you need to turn the lights off at night. You need to have a blackout. It's like Atlantic City or Miami, big resort communities, lots of hotels. They don't want to turn the lights off. Well, the ship sails at night in front of these lights. They're silhouetted. They're easy pickings. Okay? Then the German submarines eventually start operating in the Gulf of Mexico as well, where they can target like tankers coming out of Texas oil refineries. Okay, so they're sinking ships literally almost faster than we can build them. Okay. German submariners, people who sail on submarines called submariners, called this the happy time. Okay. The countermeasures weren't very effective. The targets were plenty. They could come up during the day and recharge the batteries on the surface, bask in the sun, and then tag passing by shipping. But slowly but surely we start working on ways to do this. Now, the Army has a lot of bombers. They're flying anti-submarine patrol looking for submarines. The Navy's doing the same. Eventually, after a while, we come to the conclusion that since submarines are a naval craft and the Navy's familiar with submarines, that it would make more sense for one service to have complete jurisdiction. And so they start phasing out the Army patrols as the Navy gets more aircraft, and let the Army focus on what they want to do, which is bomb enemy troops or enemy targets. So the Navy slowly but surely takes over the anti-submarine patrols along the United States coastline. And of course, they're the folks out on the front lines, out in the middle of the Atlantic. Okay. Now, a couple of ways to sink submarines. One is with the depth charge. I talked about this earlier when we talked about the patrolling of the North Atlantic. Okay, so this picture right here on the right is a depth charge going off. There's the explosion. Okay, here's the depth charges. You roll these off the back of the ship to where you think the submarine will be, which is an imprecise science because you can't see it. Okay, but you can use sonar readings and look at things and get an idea and try to bracket it with these depth charges. A better way to do it, if you can catch one on the surface, is they're not very defensible. Submarines, they're very underarmed for surface battle. They don't have a lot of guns because they spend a lot of their time underwater. They have a couple of anti-aircraft guns going around the surface. So here's a submarine that has been caught on the surface. They have to come up and charge their batteries. On the surface, the submarines run off of diesel engines. When you're underwater, you can't run the diesels. There's no oxygen, and the carbon monoxide would kill the crew. So you run on batteries underwater, but your battery length is limited, and so you come up on the surface and run your diesels and charge your batteries. Okay? If you can catch a submarine on the surface with an aircraft, you can zoom in, hopefully before they can dive underwater and try to hit it. So here, somebody has missed this submarine. Okay, and they've missed it by a pretty sizable margin here. But anyway, aircraft patrols are a good way to go, but that only works so far out from the coast. You can only fly out so far before you run out of fuel. Okay? So out in the middle of the ocean, it's very much dependent on the Navy. One thing we use on the coastal waters is blimps. That's not particularly important as far as World War II is concerned. I just think blimps are really cool, and I want to ride in one so bad. All right. Why blimps? Well, remember, helicopters haven't been invented yet. Okay, airplanes have a limited duration. Okay, blimps don't go very fast, but neither do ships. Okay, but they have very long endurance because the helium provides the lift. The engines are just for steering and forward propulsion. So a blimp can kind of just follow along with the convoy, watching for submarines. Okay, because when you're higher up, you can see a submarine that's shallow, not very far under the water. Now, if a blimp spots a submarine, can they, zoom into the attack? You don't zoom in anywhere in a blimp, but you could radio. Although the blimps are armed, okay, but they can radio to the ships, "Hey, beware! There's a submarine off to the starboard bow," and of course the ships are sailing in convoys by this point in large groups, and they'll have destroyer escorts. In some cases, now an individual ship might be heading somewhere to join a convoy. But blimp can spot a submarine, hop on the radio, and you could call. I'll tell you who you could call is an airplane. Okay? So now prior to the war, the Navy really only operated mostly seaplanes and carrier-based aircraft, but they start getting land-based aircraft as well to patrol for submarines. So they can come in and deliver a knockout blow. Now eventually, we start building small aircraft carriers. Okay, now these aren't large compared to the big fleet aircraft carriers that operate out in the high seas with the battle fleets. These are built on merchant ship hulls, basically. They're not real fast. They don't carry a whole lot of airplanes. This picture is kind of deceptive. I need to find a better picture, but when I was building the PowerPoint, I was in kind of a hurry many years ago. This aircraft carrier, you'll notice, is packed with airplanes. Okay, These are Army airplanes, as the aircraft carrier is transporting aircraft to the war zone. So it's being used more as a freighter in this case. You wouldn't be able to fly these airplanes off. There's no room. Okay, but a small aircraft carrier like this can operate like a couple of dozen airplanes. Okay, and you can use these to escort the convoys to provide air cover out in the middle of the Atlantic past the range of land-based aircraft. Now, eventually, we build enough of these small aircraft carriers that some of them can actually operate independently. They'll give them a destroyer, escort, and these aircraft carriers will just go out into the Atlantic looking for submarines. So some of them, might be escorting some of the high-value convoys, and then others may be out actually on the prowl hunting for submarines. And slowly but surely, we will start to overcome the submarine menace. The tipping point is in May of 1943, which is jumping forward a little bit. Up to that point, the Germans kind of have the upper hand, but we're slowly making progress. Okay, after May of 43, the Allies have the upper hand, and the Germans are on the defensive. But they're on the offensive. They're attacking our ships, but it's becoming, the latter half of war is becoming more dangerous to be in the submarines than it is to be on the cargo ship. So this is largely what we're dealing with in 1942. This is the main thing the Navy's doing. So it's not real dramatic in the terms of a whole lot of major battles, but we're trying to get control of the sea lanes to where we can send the goods over to England. We've got just enough room to give you a couple more slides here. Okay. Another thing we're doing in 1942 is we're starting to send heavy 4-engine bombers over to England from the United States Army Air Force. Okay. They're going to start building up a strategic bombardment force that can be used to bombard German war industries. That really doesn't start happening until 1943. But in 1942, we're starting to fly the planes over and start to organize the squadrons and find the airfields and get the barracks set up. And we're flying a few small short-range missions against occupied France just to kind of get the crews some experience. So this is going to be more of a 43 thing. But in 42, we are working on sending the troops over that way. And we're sending ground troops into England to start building up our forces there. The big thing that happens in 42, I think I have just enough room to crank this out, is in November of 1942, the Allies, that's the Americans, and the British, will invade North Africa. Now this seems like, what? I thought we wanted to fight the Germans. Well, yeah, we do. Okay. Roosevelt desperately needs Americans fighting Germans on the ground somewhere, but we're in no position to invade Europe and hit the Germans head on, although there are certainly people who wanted to do that because that's what Americans want to do, but we weren't in a position to do that. There were a limited number of Germans in North Africa. Remember Mussolini? Everybody forgets Mussolini. He had sent Italian troops into Africa. Remember, he wants to rebuild the Roman Empire. They've been fighting the British in North Africa. The Italians aren't doing really well. Hitler has sent some German divisions in to help bolster and support the Italians. Okay, and so it would be nice to get the Germans out of North Africa because they can threaten the Mediterranean sea lanes. Okay. And the main reason, though, we invade North Africa is political reasons. It's somewhere we can go to try to kill some Germans with a relatively good chance of success. So late in late in the year, November 8th, I believe it was, 1942, American troops land in North Africa. British and Americans. They land here, and here, and here. Okay? I'm running out of time, so I won't bore you with all the details. This is called Operation Torch. You can see that on the map up here. Operation Torch. It's significant because it's the first major offensive action taken against the Germans by the Americans in World War II. The fighting in North Africa involves relatively small units compared to what comes later in the war, but it's like our first step to go in and fight the Germans. We're running out of time. We'll call it quits. We'll pick up with Lecture 13 the diplomacy of World War II.